Please welcome to the stage Mr. Dan Schulman, President and CEO of PayPal, and John Hope Bryant.
So first of all, I must apologize. We are running about 25 minutes behind, but I hope that you found this evening worthwhile. We will be back on schedule first thing in the morning. You got that? I have a special relationship with Dan Schulman. You would know him as the CEO of one of the largest and most successful payment and commerce companies in the world. I would know him as a special soul. Dan and I had our first real substantive conversation in Idaho, was it? And he asked me the strangest question. In the middle of an environment where the world did not seem all that just, and before George Floyd, a year before, he said, "I don't like what I'm seeing in the world, John, and what do you think if I committed," Dan, sorry to tell your business, $50 million of my own compensation to help underserved neighborhoods? And I said, "No, I don't think you should do that." He was as shocked as you look. Who wouldn't want somebody to give them $50 million? He wasn't going to give it to me. He was going to give it to those he thought were in need. My concern was, what happens when Dan's not at PayPal anymore? What happens if something happens to Dan? And people have become accustomed to somebody giving them their dignity. What happens when you can't rely on that anymore? What happens when the next CEO doesn't have the same culture or ethos? I didn't want to discourage his giving. I wanted to encourage something that was actually sustainable. So I said, what would happen if you looked at this as part of your business? What would happen if you reimagined this and maybe did something that was embedded in the business and would last forever? Maybe it would be $25 or $50 million, maybe every year or over a period of time. The next thing I know, Dan Schulman has committed through PayPal $500+ million for the empowerment of the poor and the underserved in a mission, a sustainable mission of social justice embedded in his company. So now that whether he's there or not, whether he does another thing or not, this is now part of how the company operates. This is in the company's bones. I saw Dan again 4 months ago. And in the midst of what he's already done, he says, "What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, Doug McMillan and I have launched a movement of financial literacy for all to embed financial literacy into the business plan of corporate America as a new civil rights issue for all." And he looked at me incredulous. I don't know if you remember this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
He was offended. "Why haven't you asked me?" He didn't want to be a member of the organization. He wanted to be a founding member of the organization. We had to go back and we had to take a vote, go back and actually have it retroactively embedded. That Dan, I don't know if you knew this, we retroactively embedded you as a founding member because you were so passionate. We actually thought we couldn't do this with legitimacy without having a CEO like you who really believed part of that founding group. This is the stuff that nobody ever tells you. It's not in a press release. It's not in a public statement. You would never know what I just told you unless I told you about this man. So I'm going to ask you once again to welcome my friend, our friend, Dan Schulman. And I prefer how you're dressed to how I'm dressed. So Dan, why are you so crazy? I mean, when I mean crazy, I mean normal. But normal is abnormal these days. Like when I talk to you, just a normal guy. Mm-hmm. You happen to be very successful, you happen to be blessed, you happen to be running a global company. But if you're walking down the street, nobody would know you from anybody else because you don't take yourself seriously. Where does that come from? And how important do you think that is? And by the way, I want to acknowledge France, who's here, who's your right arm, and Summer, who are also here supporting you. How do you think that embeds into how you lead?
Well, first of all, John, thank you so much for that embarrassing story, which is absolutely true. And it's also great to be speaking in front of people. I haven't done that for 20 months.
So this is your first major event in North America?
Yeah, actually across the world. Last time was in February of 2020 in New York City. So first time. So it's a little weird for me right now, so I'm figuring it all out again. So, you know, I think whether we want it or not, we're all kind of shaped and formed by our parents, every one of us. And, you know, my parents would never, ever even dream of letting me be anything but normal. I mean, you know, anytime I spoke too much, my dad would say, son, we're born with 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionately. You know, anytime I'd start to say something, he would say something like, son, you are what you do, not what you say. And that's what defines a person. And, you know, my mom marched me in civil rights marches in my baby carriage. My dad thought I would be the youngest person in the country in an FBI file as a result of it. And so, you know, from an early age, you know, I was just brought up not to care, but just like that's who we are. We're all one. And it's carried through to my business career. And I think, you know, I do a lot of martial arts. That's another big thing that I do. And I think you do enough martial arts, you know, no matter how much you know, you're always going to get hit. And you never know that much. And you have to have a huge sense of humility. And I think that authenticity helps me be just true to myself.
How do you fuse your personal feelings of what happened with George Floyd? I know that affected you personally. And how you fuse that and make that part of a business commitment, that sense of social justice, and convert that into something that's sustainable and meaningful. In other words, tell the audience about that $500 million commitment and how that translates social justice through an economic lens.
Yeah. Well, post the death of George Floyd, I mean, and so many others, but post George Floyd, it just set forth a flood of emotion, not just in me, but honestly across our country. And I had never seen more emotion inside PayPal. I mean, there was despair, frustration, anger, hope. There's a bunch of things, but just a ton of emotion. I knew, because PayPal is a very values-based company, you know, we've taken values-based stands on a number of issues, taken down white supremacist groups from raising money on our platform, which, you know, often resulted in threats against my family, death threats against me. And I knew we had to stand up again because, no business stands alone from its community that it stands in. We're not a bubble. We're a part of the world. We're a part of the communities we live in, but all the communities we serve. And, I was going to give a couple of $1 million of our money to what I thought were very well-deserving charitable organizations that work on the ground, that were really addressing the issues of social justice and civil rights. And I spoke to a number of Black leaders inside PayPal and Black leaders across the country to talk about this. Reverend Barber, a number of leaders. And I remember one of them saying, Dan, you need to stand up at this time. This needs to be not a moment in time, but a movement over time. And that means that you cannot give a couple of $1 million at the moment, but you need to think about what is the stand that you're going to make, and how do you think about doing something over the long run, not just right now. How do you become not just against racism, but anti-racist, be part of the fight against systemic racism? And that's where I really kind of came back to my team, to Franz, I talked this through with my fiance, Summerlee, like a lot of things, like what do we do at this moment? And we decided that we were going to stand up. And at the time, I think it was the largest corporate commitment at the time. It's now one of the top 5 or 10 largest corporate commitments, that we were going to fight the racial wealth gap. And the racial wealth gap, it's the same today as it was in 1968 at the height of the last civil rights movement. And we felt like we might be able to do something about that, and just do a small part. I always say to people, you can't start a revolution by thinking, dreaming big. You got to do things one step at a time. Make a move. Then other people react to that move, and soon enough, things can fall into place, and you can make a real difference. And so we decided to do a $535 million commitment. And that commitment was to nonprofits. We did $5 million to nonprofits. Operation Hope was obviously one of those. We also did $15 million of grants, not loans, grants to small businesses that were owned by Black owners, because Black businesses were going out of business at the rate of 44%, double the national average. Why? Because they couldn't get access to capital. Because there's forms of systemic racism that goes on, and discrimination, educational disparities. And so we gave out $15 million to about 1,900 Black-owned businesses. By the way, 91% of them are still in business today. 91%.
So these are equity investments, essentially.
What?
Equity investments without a dividend back to you.
Exactly. And then we gave $500 million to community banks inside neighborhoods that are underserved, and credit unions like Hope Credit Union. And we gave $100 million to Black and Latinx-led venture firms that were investing in entrepreneurs of color. Because, as everybody in this room probably knows, only 2% of venture funds go to entrepreneurs of color. And so we felt like if you wanted to create real wealth, generational wealth, that we pass from one generation to another, it's investing in entrepreneurs. And we think that's probably going to be one of our best investments that we ever make as a company. And so we really thought about this across a wide landscape. And by the way, we're just starting on this, John. It's like that was the initial commitment. You really inspired me on that conversation we had where I wanted to give up my salary and my compensation. And you said, do something systemic. And, you know, what you probably don't realize is what I then did is went back to all of our employees and looked at those who were struggling to make ends meet. And now we have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into our employees so that none of them have to worry about making ends meet every month. And that was you. That was you.
No, that was you, my man.
That was you inspiring me.
So as we come to a close here, Dan, what do you have to say? What's your statement to corporate leaders who are watching this? Entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, founders, successful people. We're not looking for a handout. We're looking for a hand up. We're trying to teach people how to fish at scale. Folks who say, but Dan, how's your business doing? Is this going to suffer? Are you going to suffer at PayPal? Your shareholders going to suffer? What I've been looking and tracking you, your growth is through the roof since you made this commitment. What do you say to corporate leaders who question whether you can do well or do good too? Last word.
I think the idea that profit and purpose are at odds with each other is ridiculous. And that, where do people want to work? People want to work at companies that make a difference. We spend, unfortunately, a majority of our waking life working. And the best employees want to be somewhere that has a mission, that has values, that has a sense of purpose, and that stands up for those values publicly. And I think you attract the very best people to your company if you have that. And I think the biggest sustainable competitive advantage that any company has is the strength, the diversity, and the passion of their employees. And I will bet on that anytime. And I think that's why profit and purpose go hand in hand.
So I was going to ask about the future of payment systems, et cetera, but my guess is you guys can get that interview version of Dan Schulman elsewhere. I actually don't want to leave this point. As we wrap this up, I want you to let marinate what one of the top CEOs in the world just said to you. He said, and you correct me if I get this wrong, Dan, no sympathy, no handouts, no charity, although there's a place for philanthropy and giving back in everybody's life. As a hard-nosed CEO, you believe, as one of the top performing CEOs and companies in the world, that an investment in social justice and in your employees' well-being gives one of the greatest returns on brand that you could imagine. Did I translate that properly?
I mean, it's not just me that's saying that. There's so many empirical studies that say that same thing. It's actually ridiculous that not everybody is doing this. By the way, I think about it, you know, I go, wow, we're just going to have a huge competitive advantage because not every company is thinking about it that way, because if they did, you know, everybody would be lifted up on this, including all businesses. So absolutely, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Schulman.